Good afternoon and welcome back to Edinburgh. Today we're going to start off at the new college of Edinburgh University, and then we're going to transition from the old town over to the new town. If you remember before, I said that Edinburgh is like a tale of two cities, the old town and the new town. However, again, everything's relative, because when we talk about the new town of Edinburgh, they started to build it in the late 1700s. But at the moment I'm standing outside the new college. We call it the new college, again, everything being relative. This dates back to 1846. If you remember last week, if you watched our broadcast from Carlton Hill, you may remember we talked about one of the architects called William Playfair. And we talked about the neoclassical buildings of Edinburgh, but we also talked about the neo-Gothic. Now this is also a William Playfair building. We're going to see a couple more buildings as we transition down the street we call the Mound. But before we go any further, I've got a few shout-outs. I know people like to hear their shout-outs, so I'm going to say hello to Alexandra Zeiparth in Rheinbeck in Deutschland. Danke schön, Alexandra. I've got Carrie Heiser from Duval in Washington State, USA. You must be up really early to watch us, unless you're watching us in the recorded highlights. But hello, Carrie, nice to see you there. And also we've got Laura Rovenia on the other side of the US, almost diametrically opposite down in Florida, in Vero Beach. So it's nice to see you guys are watching, and hopefully we're giving you entertainment and some information. And obviously what we're doing it for is to encourage you, so when everything's back to normal, you come back to Scotland, you come and see us. We also got asked a few questions we talk about the blue badge guides. You'll see Mike and I always wear our blue badges. The blue badge guide means that we are fully qualified guides. We are trained through the Scottish Tour Guides Association. We are members of the Scottish Tour Guides Association. It's a 2-year course at Edinburgh University when we were studying there, and Mike and I studied together. We cover the whole of Scotland. We do walking tours or driving tours in the cities, but we cover the whole of Scotland. And we work for companies from all around the world. Scottish Tour Guides, there's about 300 tour guides. All different languages are spoken. So if you want to even check out our website, go to www.stga.co.uk. So that explains the Scottish Tour Guides. Now the faculty we're looking at here is the new College of Edinburgh. This is the Faculty of Divinity, or the Department of Divinity. This is where you come and you want to study theology. You'll come here to this department here. Now I mentioned there are 4 universities in Edinburgh. Edinburgh is the largest of the 4 and the oldest of the 4 here in Edinburgh. But actually it's a bit of a Johnny-come-lately, because the university itself dates back to the late 1500s. But it's not the oldest. The oldest university in Scotland is actually St Andrews University, and that goes back to the 1400s. Edinburgh is known as the first secular university. And we have a little look inside here. We'd love to take you into the quad here, but there's a bit of maintenance going on. It's a lovely university, lovely part of the building here. And during the Edinburgh International Festival, the university gives over a lot of its departments to the festival itself as venues, and this is one of the popular venues for the comedy festival here in Edinburgh. Now actually August the 31st is usually the last day of the Edinburgh International Festival. If you haven't seen anything, you can see it online, and I would highly recommend it, because tonight is the night that we normally have our firework display here in Edinburgh as well. Usually on the last day of the festival we all congregate in the parks. We're going to go into the park or the gardens later on. Now we're going to take a walk down as we transition from the old town to the new town. But some of the best views of the old town are from the new town itself. It's got one of these vistas or skylines that is unrivaled in the world. Now the mound itself is an artificial street. It was actually built from the rubble that was being excavated while they built the new town of Edinburgh. Back in the 60s and the 70s, they actually put underfloor heating on the street here, because a lot of the buses were careening out of control. And you can see we've got big buses here in the city. Some of the buses were going out of control when it was very icy and snowy, and slipping down and causing accidents. So they actually put underfloor heating on it. I'm not sure if the heating works anymore, but it was one of those talking points we had in the 1960s and 70s. Now I'm going to put my mask on here because it is a busy part and we like to take care of everybody else's safety and security. So I'm going to put my mask on. Hi, we've got a piper coming down here to join us. How are you doing? Very good. Maybe Mike can pick up a wee picture of the... Yeah. Just get some of the great sights. So we just put our masks on. Hope you can hear me okay. Just while we walk down this little busy street here. Now I mentioned that the mound is an artificial street. If you remember in one of our previous views...
Which way to Castle?
The castle.
Is it this way?
Yeah.
Oh, crikey. We're going to the park.
I always laugh when people in Edinburgh ask me where the castle is. It's the most obvious thing in the skyline. But let's continue down the mound. So, when we go down here, you'll get a great view of the castle, but you also get a great view of the new college buildings here. This is when the skyline starts to open up. This is some of the most spectacular views you'll see as a skyline anywhere in the world. Now the castle itself was protected on one side by a lock. It was seen to be impenetrable, although it was actually invaded a couple of times, but it was considered to be impenetrable. And one of the places of defence we had down here was a lock. So before they built all this road here, this was a lock or a lake. It was known as the North Lock. In order to build the new town of Edinburgh, they started to drain the loch. When they drained the loch, it is said they found the remains of over 120 bodies at the bottom. Some of them had their hands tied to their feet. Now, this goes back to the witch trials here in Edinburgh. If you were accused of being a witch here in Edinburgh, you were taken down to the North Loch. In some cases your hands would be tied to your feet and then you'd be thrown in. If you floated to the top, well then you were definitely a witch, because they thought that was the hand of the devil raising you up. And if that was the case, you were taken up to Edinburgh Castle and you'd be burned alive at the stake. However, it wasn't all bad news, because if you sunk to the bottom of the lake, then you weren't a witch. But you were dead anyway. So if you get accused of being a witch here in Edinburgh, my idea and my advice would be get out of town. This is no place to be a witch. Let's move on a wee bit further and we'll get out of this busy thoroughfare here. At the bottom of the mound, we have two sister art galleries. And we talked about the neoclassic buildings, and this is a classic example. Again, the architect here of the art galleries was the same architect who built the new college, William Playfair. All of the art galleries and all the museums in Scotland are free of charge. I highly recommend you go into the galleries. This first one that we're seeing, the neoclassical style, is actually the youngest of the two. And this is the National Gallery of Scotland. There are some great pictures in here. Not just Scottish art, also some of the European Grand Masters and also some American artists. Highly recommended as a visit. It's getting the two galleries are getting some maintenance. In fact, the whole of Edinburgh at the moment seems to be getting maintenance, which is good because the universities all start coming back in about 3 weeks' time, and they're trying to get everything finished before the universities all start. So I say the sister buildings. So the young one here is the first one. The building in front is the Royal Scottish Academy. I think, Mike, are you a member of the Royal Scottish Academy? No? Okay, the Royal Scottish Academy is It is open to the public, but they do have private shows in here as well. The galleries are linked underneath, and there is a lovely restaurant connected to them as well. Now we're actually passing over the gardens themselves, and we'll take a little walk in, but one of the things we're going to show you when we get in here is some of the spectacular views you're going to see of Edinburgh. And you'll see the castle sitting on top of its volcanic rock. So when we come down the mound, we come onto Princes Street. Princes Street is the main shopping street in the city, so it's the main shopping thoroughfare. And it's from here that you get some great views of the old town. Now, just between the two galleries, you can get a good view of another neo-Gothic monument. This is a monument dedicated to Walter Scott. It's called the Scot Monument. Now, you can climb to the top of this monument. It's about 250 steps to the top. So you've got to be fit when you get up there. It's also very narrow. But it's got 3 different floors on it, and in each floor it gives you the story of Walter Scott's books, talks about the characters, and also his contribution to the city of Edinburgh. And it is in fact the tallest monument in the world dedicated to an author. We have spoken before about Edinburgh's reputation for it's the first city in the world to get the UNESCO City of Literature title. We're very, very proud of that. And indeed, one of Walter Scott's novels, or a series of novels, are called the Waverley Novels. And our main train station in the city is named after Walter Scott's novels. Further behind here, you get the clock tower. We've seen this before from the other perspective. But then, this is the Balmoral Hotel. 5-star hotel. Have a look at the clock if you can see it. The clock is always 3 minutes early. And it's 3 minutes early for a reason. The hotel itself is directly above Edinburgh Waverley Station, the main station in the city. Now, this used to be a railway hotel. And the railway company was always worried in case you'd miss your trains. So what they do is they keep the clock fast. So when you're running along the street, you're looking at the clock, you think you're going to miss your train, you see you've got 3 minutes to go, you get a wriggle on, and you're there, you make your train. So the people of Edinburgh don't miss your train. Now, there's one building here, again, look at the neoclassical style of this building here. We are looking at the Royal Scottish Academy. We're going to be off the street in a couple of minutes. I'm sure you can pick up on the traffic here. This is normally a lot busier here in Edinburgh because this is actually a bank holiday today. Not so much in Scotland, but for the rest of the Great Britain, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And we normally get this is our busiest day for the tourist season. However, situations as such, it's not as busy as it normally is. So we're going to come off the main street and we're going to take you into Princes Street Gardens itself. One of the things I'm going to show you is one of Edinburgh's must-sees when you're here during the summer, and it's known as the Floral Clock. The clock itself is a work of art. Everything in here is an active working clock, and everything in here is dedicated every year to a different charity. This year, all the flowers are dedicated to all of the key workers of the United Kingdom. So people in the National Health Service, the police, the fire departments, anybody who's considered a key worker. I don't know if Mike can get it. There's a little birdhouse in here, and the little bird pops out every 15 minutes there, and pops up longer on the hour. So the message here is stay safe, and it's dedicated to all the key workers, known as the Floral Clock. And we get into the gardens, we'll be a little bit less busy. And we'll take you on a little tour of the garden itself and taking in some of the most spectacular views of Edinburgh Castle. The park is used a lot by the people of Edinburgh. A lot of the office workers will come here, have their lunch. And we also have, during the festival, we have concerts and lots of public activities. Now we're going to hand over here. I'm going to hand over to Mike. But before we hand over to Mike, I'm just going to mention again where you can see us. So if you want to catch up with us at any time, you can catch up with us, Joe and Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland. And we'll be happy to hear from you as well. We will be running some watch parties again. The last one was quite popular, so we'll be doing them again. But I'm going to hand over to Mike. I'm going to take off my microphone here, and I'll clip it onto Mike. He's going to say hello.
Okay.
Okay, so over to Mike.
Thank you.
We've got a little buddy there just following us here. See little Jack Russell?
Good afternoon, and once again it's a pleasure to share this tour with Joe, and we're going into beautiful Princess Street Gardens West. Maybe some of you have already been to Edinburgh on tour, and hopefully it's bringing back some nice memories. So we've got a kind of cooler kind of day. It's coming and going a wee bit overcast, but it's dry. We don't have any rain, so that's amazing. Not amazing, it's we do have a lot of dry weather. If you'd like to look along here, I can point these shelters out. These were air raid shelters. Today they're seated areas where people can come and relax and enjoy nice views of the castle. But yeah, and they're going to modernise them. There's kind of different schools of thought about this, because it may take away some of our history during the Second World War, because we were very conscious, as any other place was, that this area could have been bombed. So I'm going to wander down this little pathway, and you get another glimpse of these steps that Joe came down to talk about the Floral Clock. I'm going to take you into an area that maybe not many people come. They come through West Princess Street Gardens, but don't always maybe go down further down the hill, and there are some hidden gems down here that I want to point out. And it's quite quiet down here some of the time, so it's a bit more secluded. So that's the reason I'm not wearing a mask as Joe was earlier, because coming down the mound was a bit of a pinch point, because many people, the tourist sector's opening up in Edinburgh just now, and it's coming back, and it's getting quite crowded with people, so we have to be very safe. So if we are going to be taking groups of people, we've got a maximum number that we would have in our group, and we would be doing social distancing. We would be taking people to areas that were safe, where you could be relaxed, not where it was too busy. I'm going to show you this amazing building here on the right hand side. This is called the Gardner's Cottage, and it's got a fairy tale feel to it. And because of this, there was a children's television programme called Teapot Travels that was actually made here, and the host was a lady. She was Gemma Jones, actually. She's the mother in Bridget Jones's Diary. You've maybe seen her. She's quite a famous actress. And she was Aunt Lizzie, and she would be here to host children coming to visit, and they would be encouraged to take a teacup off the shelf, and the teacup off the shelf would have some historical object on it, and usually from a museum across the British Isles, and sometimes in Scotland. So it was a very popular series, but apart from that, it was built in 1886 when these gardens became public, because it took a long time for these gardens to become public. They were private gardens for the use of the residents in the new town in Princess Street. And because people were imbibing too much with alcohol, they decided, for some reason, I don't know why, that having a big expansive garden would maybe encourage people to move away from the more populated areas, which doesn't seem a really good move. But today all of that is under control. I want to show you this little picture of the inside, which you would not expect to see, this elegant interior here of the gardener's cottage. And this was for the head gardener, because if you had a public park, you needed to have a man in charge, and it was a nice place to be. Very elegant, beautiful, love it. Victorian architecture and wonderful garden as well. So that was in the 1880s, but as Joe was saying, this used to be water. It used to be called an loch, and it was finally drained in the 1760s with the building of Edinburgh's new town, because the residents didn't want to have polluted, smelly, stagnant water. It had been not that in the early days. It had been quite a nice picturesque lake, but as time went on, people just saw it a convenient place to dump your sewerage. So very inconvenient, but then they drained it and it became this amazing gardens that we can see today, and we can freely range and walk here and feel quite relaxed. Now I'm going to point out a military connection here. This memorial is to the Royal Scots Regiment, and they were the oldest regiment in the British Army, and they were founded back in 1633, and they were then called the Royal Regiment of Foot. There was an infantry regiment, and they took part in many conflicts right up until the present day, of course, in various European countries. Initially in France, they were founded during the 30 Years' War with France by King Charles I, really, and a man called Hepburn. And they proceeded to be a lauded regiment with a great history, connected very much to Scotland, and their motto of the regiment is "Don't touch me with impunity," which happens to be the motto of Scotland. So it's firmly in our history, is the Royal Scots. Now, if Joe can take a wee dawdle, a wee wander, you may actually see some of the past monarchs here of Scotland. We've got Charles the Second there. His father was famously executed, but he managed to get himself made king, and he's on the left. And as we move along here, he died without legitimate issue, and his brother James the Seventh took over, and he was a Catholic monarch and stirred up a lot of people in the Highlands to support the Catholic monarchy, but of course down in London and over much of Scotland too, they favoured Protestantism, so he was made to abdicate eventually. And then we move on to William and Mary, 1689 to 1702. And Mary was the Protestant daughter of James the Seventh. And then we move further along to Queen Anne, who happened to be the last Stuart monarch, and she was queen of the whole of Great Britain. And you may have seen the film with Olivia Colman called The Favourite, and that was all about Queen Anne. I just love the sculpture work. If you can see the relief carving of figures from that Royal Scots Regiment in all sorts of different forms of uniform, from the very early days through to the present, or as near to the present as we can get. And then we go through the Georges, because we had to look to Germany, to Hanover, to establish a very tentative link to re-establish our monarchy. So you've got George the First there, George the Second, George the Third, George the Fourth. And I think it's quite significant in this kind of year of the 700th anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath that we have the motto, or one of the most famous sayings from that declaration of Arbroath. And I'm just going to walk right to the start here. Joe can stay where he is, hopefully he's still picking me up. And it says, "It's not for glory nor riches, neither is it for honours that we fight, but it is for the sake of liberty alone, which no true man loses, but at the cost of his life." And that is from the Declaration of Arbroath in the times of Robert the Bruce in 1320, famous document. And then the more current monarchs, although our present Queen is not here and represented in these medallions, but we have got the famous Edward the Eighth, who abdicated his throne to marry that American Wallace Simpson. So he only reigned for a very short time. And if you are fortunate to find an old penny, and that gives my age away, but something in currency that has his head in it, it is worth a fortune. And there is the Queen's father, who was George VI there, who died very early of lung cancer. So this is a monument to the involvement of the Royal Scots in various engagements, and you can see down the bottom we've got West Germany, Berlin, Korea, Egypt, Cyprus, and so on. Now, in 2006, because of defence cuts, this famous regiment was amalgamated into the Royal Regiment of Scotland, as were the other famous Scottish regiments. So they were a bit put out in having to surrender their cap badge. But the history of that regiment is so significant, I don't think they'll ever lose it. So we're going to move on further. I just love the seclusion of these gardens. It's just nice and open. It's beautiful to walk through. I'm just going to take a wee wander to this tree just around the corner here. See here, it's a memorial to the Holocaust, and it's planted by children of the Edinburgh Hebrew congregation, as you can see there. 6 million Jews died, but not just Jews, all other areas who are minorities, homosexuals, people with disabilities, and we don't want to forget them either, because it was a huge humanitarian crisis, but this is a living memorial to that terrible event. I'm going to take a wee shortcut across the grass. I think we can walk across the grass here. That's another one. This is against the Holocaust, and it's about the liberation of Belson concentration camp. So these gardens have a lot of memorials, very significant. You can see today there's quite a few people out in the grass, although it's quite cool, but there's no rain, and the grass is relatively dry. It won't be completely dry, but dry enough to relax. International Workers' Memorial Day. This is a council run and owned property, this Princess Street Gardens West, and there's a facility for everybody. So some of the locals don't take too kindly to when there are big events in here, concerts, and they close it off because they feel ownership. Now I'm going to talk about this statue here. This one, you see the woman and the two children. Now the woman signifies the genius of architecture, crowning the theory and practice of art. And this was a sculpture which was originally indoors, and it was made by a sculptor, William Brodie, and presented to his son-in-law on his marriage. And his son-in-law was a man I've spoken about before, and that's Sir James Gowans, who is well known for some may say eccentric buildings around Edinburgh, but is probably most well known, or we don't know him for this statue, but we know the statue is Greyfriars Bobby, which we have spoken about in an earlier tour. So the sculptor of this piece also designed Greyfriars Bobby, which eccentrically enough is the smallest listed building in Edinburgh. And maybe we should think about that when people go up and rub his nose. But this here is just such a significant memorial, but maybe loses a bit of its significance being outdoors. The house that it was in was demolished, and that was Sir James Gowans' house originally. Very fancy, decorative building in Napier Road, which no longer exists. Okay, so we're going to move along to another statue here. Now this elephant is quite a significant memorial, because we had a bit of a catastrophe, a bit of a terrible situation here in Edinburgh, which was only uncovered recently, where the remains of dead babies were not made available to parents who'd lost youngsters. And the council covered up the fact that these remains were being cremated after main cremations at Morton Hall Crematorium. When all the main cremations were done, they would cremate the babies. And this had been going on for 40 years, and these parents had no idea what had happened. To, grieve properly, that was taken away from them. And people felt it was an inconvenient truth to actually make these people aware. And today we have finally got them to own up to it. And the council, as a gift to these grieving parents, have commissioned a leading architect called Andy Scott to make this elephant. And he says the reason it's an elephant is an elephant never forgets. And if you look at the little flowers on it, these are forget-me-nots. Once again, don't forget these lost babies. So we'll move on and we'll lighten the mood a bit, I think. Okay. I think people are becoming more accountable these days, and we hope, especially government, but who knows? Now we're walking towards a very familiar landmark in Edinburgh, which is called the Ross Bandstand. But before we do, I'd like to show you this picture here, and it's of how, Joe was talking about this earlier, I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's how Edinburgh looked when the Nor Loch was here. And it was put there, I think he told you all this, but it was drained finally in the 1760s, and you can see it here. The Nor Loch, or North Loch. So we got the wonderful gardens today, and a bit of a gruesome connection is the fact that Joe told you about the bodies and remains, human remains that were excavated from the remains of that loch when it was drained. Well, look at the beautiful fertile soil. I'll let you make the connection, I'll not say anymore. So we're coming up to the Ross Bandstand, and this was constructed here in about 1935. You can see from the architecture, it's got a semi-Art Deco look to it. And it was William Henry Ross, who was a distiller, chairman of the Distillers Company, who gifted money to create this public facility here. And outdoor concerts, it was like a conventional bandstand, but today can host some of the great names in pop music, celebrity performers today. There's a bit of street theatre going on down there, but I'll not comment too much on that. I'm just going to go a wee bit quiet just for a minute or two. I'll let you enjoy the views of the castle as I'm just going to have a wee sip of water. I'll be back with you shortly. I can appreciate the volcanic rock, and look at how formidable that is. Whoever decided to build a castle there knew what they were doing. It would be very difficult to attack, and hence of course why the Loch was put here in the 15th century was an added defence. Now we're just going to move along further. Fantastic views. I've become a bit disillusioned because just as a tourist guide, I used to impress people by saying, oh, look at the palm trees. People say you could never grow a palm tree in Scotland. And then one of my clients said, no, they're not palm trees, they're yuccas. To me that does look fairly much like a palm tree, but somebody said we have such a thing as called cabbage plants as well, which doesn't sound quite as picturesque as a palm tree. We're going to speak about this memorial. It's a connection with America, USA and Scotland, a tribute. And the sculptor of this was a man called James Tate Mackenzie, and he was a Canadian, but he spent a lot of time in Philadelphia in the States during the First World War. He rehabilitated soldiers, people who had terrible scarring, and he was very interested in anatomy and physical health. In fact, he was one who was able to make masks and covers to cover terrible scars that people would have, veterans of the First World War. He prided himself in anatomy. You can see the soldier here. Very striking. He was also a friend of Baden-Powell, the founder of the Boy Scout movement, and believed to encourage people to get outside, and people who were suffering shell shock or suffering from depression. He was one of the early people to say, get out there, improve your physical health, feel a lot better. And it's a thank you in a way from America to Scotland, because Scotland endured huge losses during the First World War compared to the size of the country. Now, if you look behind, the frieze behind is the transition from civilian through to military. So you can see fishermen, you can see people involved in agriculture and all sorts, country pursuits, and the transition into the kilts and into the arms and into the pipe band. So it's quite a piece, this sculpture, you know. And James Tate Mackenzie was so proud of this, he wanted his heart buried in front of the statue, but the town council would not allow it. They said, no, it's not consecrated ground, we're not going to allow you to do that. So he is built in a kind of semi-anonymous, he's buried in a kind of semi-anonymous spot at the Church of St Cuthbert's, which is just further along there. Okay. Right. So we're just walking along and we're enjoying the views here. I've got a feeling that might be a maple. Maybe Joe can tell me if that is a maple. If it is, that would be very significant to be beside that statue with the chap who had Canadian connections. Although both his parents were Scottish, he had very strong connections with Scotland as well. So we're keeping walking along, and we have Princess Street just on the top there. They had thought about putting a canal in here to improve the picturesque aspect of Princess Street Gardens, but because they built the mound that we walked down, which is a kind of residual kind of place to put all the foundations of the new town, it would have been very difficult to put a canal in, so they decided to change their minds on that one. We're coming up to Wojciech. I hope I've said that right. Wojciech. Is it? Yeah, Wojciech. Thanks, Joe. And a memorial to this bear, Siberian brown bear, who was adopted by the Polish army, and a young Polish soldier took pity on the bear as a bear cub and decided to bring it along with regard to his army pursuits during the Second World War. And you can see a Polish soldier beside Wojciech. Now, Wojciech from the Polish means happy warrior. And he was a very happy bear because they used to feed him beer and he used to have cigarettes, but he wouldn't smoke the cigarettes, he ate the cigarettes. So goodness knows what that did to his digestive system. And on the frieze here, you can see the early days when the young soldier adopts the bear just as a bear cub, and then he accompanies them into battle actually and starts to move munition cases in Italy as the Polish army moves through to Italy, and then eventually comes to Scotland because there was an army camp that the Polish army used down in the borders of Scotland, and he began to feel his age a bit. He was only about late teens, if you like, but he was taken to Edinburgh Zoo and ended his days there, Wojciech. And visiting Polish soldiers sometimes would flick a cigarette or two in his direction as a kind of memory, because he was also a soldier, would you believe? He was an enlisted soldier because it was against the rules for the regiment he was in to adopt a mascot. So he was a proper one of the crowd, Wojciech. So we're going to move along to our final talking point, which is not far away. You see the seagulls are out. They can spot you quite quickly if they see you with your sandwiches. And I think these seagulls get bigger and bigger all the time. Used to be a lot of elm trees here. It prided itself in having lots, but suffered greatly in West Princess Street Gardens because of Dutch elm disease. So we will walk down towards the fountain now. So as you can see, there's a lot to see here in Edinburgh. For a city that's only about 500,000, but more than doubles normally during the tourist and festival time. Of course, there's no festival this year. Its history is awesome. There are so many connections. So if you haven't been here to Scotland, I would say come here. As soon as you feel safe to come, and contact Joe and I, and we'd be very glad to show you around. So here is this wonderful view of the Ross Fountain. Now this Ross was a different one from the Ross bandstand. He was a gunsmith, a gun maker, and he saw this fountain during the 19th century in a great exhibition in Paris and really wanted it. And he wanted it to take pride of place up in Princess Street, so it could be seen and passed by almost the whole population of Edinburgh. But there were unclothed or partially unclothed figures on here, and the town council decided, no, we will put it down in the garden because it's a bit less obvious there. Now it has recently been taken away and refurbished. You can see the gold is looking quite stunning, and the colours, the turquoise colours, and it's going. For many years it wasn't going. So how can you beat that for a view? Look at that beautiful fountain with Edinburgh Castle behind. It's just fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up and say how much we've enjoyed guiding you today, and I hope you'll continue to follow our tours. We once again will show you our page on Facebook. We have a page, Joe and Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland, and we've also got YouTube channel, and we've got Scotland with Joe, which is Joe's page, and Piping Scot Tours, which is my page, and please like and share. So I'm just going to bid you farewell, all the best, and catch up with you next Monday at 3 o'clock for another tour of Edinburgh. And I'll just ask Joe to say
Bye.
thank you, all the best.